Welcome back to the Altars and Ashes podcast. I'm BD Fleming.
I'm Austin Beardchin Tucker.
I'm Robbie Stringer.
Oh, man. Over the last season, we spent 14 weeks talking about the 1689 London Baptist Confession. We talked about deep theology throughout that time. But here's the key. Theology is never meant to be trapped in books. What we were doing was priming you for what comes next, because truth builds and doctrine builds and the gospel builds. And that brings us to this new season. This season is all about building Christian communities. We call them Christian boroughs. And so this season will follow alongside my book, Strongholds of the Kingdom. If you want to build a Christian borough, it is the penultimate resource. Before we jump into community construction, though, we want to start by talking about some questions that many Christians feel right now. Why does it feel like everything has changed? Why does it feel like raising children feels harder than it did 30 years ago? Why does it seem like every major institution is moving in the opposite direction of Christianity? Why do faithful believers increasingly feel like strangers in the culture they inhabit? Many Christians assume we're standing at a crossroads. We don't believe that's true. Not to sound alarmist, but we think we're standing at the edge of a cliff. A crossroads suggests two roads forward. A cliff suggests one that has already disappeared. And so we believe that the age of ambient Christianity is over. The culture that once reinforced Christian assumptions has collapsed. If that's true, which we think it is, then Christians face a choice. Not Republican or Democrat, not even urban or rural, not even public school versus homeschool. It's a deeper choice than that. Borough or the abyss. If we don't build, we will be built upon. Luckily, we believe God has called us to build, and he is with us when we do so. We believe that today is a perfect time for more Nehemiahs. And so today we're going to explain what that means. First, I need to hear more about this neckbeard. Austin.
Our first negative comment, and it was actually glorious. You know, I don't think people understand men who are wired like me. That does nothing but make me happy and want to do more of this. But my response is, my beard is glorious. He just don't have the testosterone to grow one like this. That's what it is.
He just doesn't understand it. Yeah, no, Austin's referring to, we got some YouTube comments and we got some Instagram comments from our last podcast on Christian nationalism. And apparently if you say those two words together, you get some angry male Karens in your comments.
Thankfully, they were very well constructed arguments and explanations of why we were wrong and all this stuff. And so thankfully it was very intelligently done. Would you guys like to read that one that we're talking about or summarize it?
The neckbeard one? Yeah, it basically said it said something to the effect of bunch of neck-bearded guys in their mommy's basement. You need to move on to something else. And I'm sitting here going, a bunch of 40-year-old or older men sitting in a garage, clearly. And he said, in your mommy's basement. I was like, oh, man.
Yeah, it's our mommy's garage. Get it right.
Yeah, exactly. It was sort of humorous. But you know, if you don't get some negative comments, are you even doing anything? You know, are you standing on truth?
It made me happy. I mean, it really did. I was like, okay.
BD, you're telling me that the engagement actually helps us.
Oh yeah, leave us all kinds of negative comments if you want, as long as you're commenting. That's all that matters.
Hey, I think we owe one of our listeners a shout out.
Rob.
Yes, Rob came and visited us Sunday. Yeah, it was good to have him. Do we have an address for Rob?
No, but Rob, if you listen to this one, contact us because we want to send you some stickers and stuff. Is that what you were going to say, Austin?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
So if you listen to this one, give us a shout. You can either go to the website where you found us before, or just comment on YouTube or something, and we'll definitely take care of you. But all right, so guys, we're talking about strongholds of the kingdom, right? We're talking about Christian boroughs, Christian communities, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to be going through this whole season on that. We're going to do, I think it's 14, I think is what we drew up on the roadmap. And I'm excited to talk about it. It's something that we're trying to do where we're at here in Central Florida. You know, other church communities are doing that elsewhere. And so, I think it's a good topic. You know, we've done a lot of conversations on household reformation, right? We've talked about what it means to have your household in order. And so the natural outgrowth of that is when you have multiple households are in order, they start to build a Christian community. And so we want to make sure that we're providing resources to our people and to people who are interested in learning more about that. So, yeah, go ahead, Vanna. You got to lift it up a little bit more.
Cover your face. Cover your face.
Yeah. Well, I was trying not to. My face is the important part. So, but yeah.
That's right.
But this is to some degree what's going to be our outline, correct? This book, by B.D. Fleming, right here. Okay. So I'm going to be reading because I have not read all this book. I'm going to be reading it gradually as we go through. So,
he read the introduction.
I've read the introduction and the first 2 chapters. So I'm basically done.
There you go. That's about how far you get in every book, right? All right. So one of the first things that I talk about in this book, and I think it's an important setting for a conversation, is where we are at as a society. So to start off with, have either one of you guys ever read Aaron Renn's book, Life in the Negative World, or read any of his articles on that framework?
I have not. I've heard you mention
it. Group, didn't we?
Oh, no. That was a different, that was a Carl Trueman book.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I've not read it. I have heard you talk about it though, and I've heard other people talk about it before. So I think I'm at least somewhat aware of what he says in it.
Yeah. We'll keep it very high level. Basically, he says he posits that there are 3 different worlds. There was the positive world, where it was a positive good to be considered a Christian. So, you couldn't run for politics if you weren't a Christian. You couldn't do anything. You needed to be a Christian in order to be positively associated in society. And then he says there's the neutral world, and that's where it sort of shifted from it being a positive good to be a Christian to just being sort of tolerated. And so, it wasn't a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing. It was just sort of like, you're a Christian. Okay. Interesting.
And that was the world we grew up in when we were kids.
Yes. And all the way up till about, I think he says up till about 2015, which I think makes sense. You think about the Obergefell ruling and stuff like that right around that time. And so at that point, he says that it shifted to the negative world, where it is viewed as a harmful thing to be a Christian.
That's the date he gives, is 2015 as the shift.
Yes, that's right. Yep. And so I think one of the challenges is that many of us assume that we're still in a neutral world. I don't think anybody thinks we're in a positive world anymore, right? I don't think anybody assumes that, like, I mean, here's the thing. We're in an interesting place because we're in the South, right? And even though we're in Florida, which is, we're in Central Florida, not Orlando. So it's still a very positive thing around here. But, Robbie, you were in Chicago, right? For a couple years. And so, outside of the Southeast, I think people live in a very different culture than even we see here. What do you guys think?
Oh, for sure. Sure. I mean, I had that experience as someone who was trained in a Bible college in Polk County, Florida. Very, just as religious here as we are, this area part of Florida. And man, I tried those same tactics in Chicago, and I did not get the same reception I did here. Because here, there is the occasional really rude person that as soon as you said church or something like that, they would get antagonistic towards you and tell you to get away or something like that. But for the most part, even if people, either people were very happy to see us or they were at least friendly, even if they clearly didn't have an interest, and they'd be nice for you for a few minutes, and then you'd leave and they'd go about their day. But yeah, when I went to a different place in Chicago, Illinois, just knocking on their door and inviting them to church or talking to somebody out and about, they'd look at you like you're some kind of alien. Like, what are you doing? And so sometimes there was definitely Nick, because they immediately ask things like, well, are you Republicans? Or how do you feel about gay rights or gay marriage? And so, like, there would a lot of times be that kind of like litmus test on whether they wanted to listen to you or not. When I first started, it was in 2008, right before the election. I remember one time I got the question, Baptist, because I was at a Baptist church at the and that was in the name. And they said, is Sarah Palin a Baptist? She was the vice presidential candidate at the time. And so you should
have said no, but Bill Clinton was.
I should have said that. Actually, that would have been very funny, because I think she's charismatic, actually. But Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter are our Baptist presidents, whether we want to kind of acknowledge that or not. But yeah, it's very different in different parts of the world, or even different parts of our country, for sure.
Yeah. So what are some ways, and Robbie, you just kind of talked about some of them, but what are some ways that you guys have seen where you witness that we're in the negative world? One that pops off my head, and I'll just throw it out there, is there's a guy that I follow on Instagram that goes out and holds like an abortion sign and just, wants to have conversations with people. And the number of times that people walk up and rip the sign out, or actually like physically try to harm him or throw red paint on him, or, something like that, is honestly insane. And so just saying we shouldn't kill babies is a controversial thing that will get you not only ostracized, potentially beat up or in jail. If you go pray outside of a abortion clinic, you can wind up in jail.
Well, I think England is and Canada are a good warning side to where we're heading as a culture, because both of them have laws specifically for praying outside, even peacefully, quietly. In England, you can be arrested just for quietly praying in your head outside an abortion clinic. So they're always like 10, 15 years ahead of us. They used to be more, but I think they've gotten closer to us as time has gone, of where we're heading.
Or we've gotten closer to them.
That's what I mean. Yeah, we've gotten closer to them. So when I was growing up, when we were still in that positive Christian world, I remember preachers saying, look at England, they're like 40, 50 years to where we're heading, because they had already gotten to a point where it was considered you did not speak about faith at all in public, because it was you didn't do that. We were still speaking, like in Florida. Robbie and I used to go on these soul winning marathons, and we'd knock on like 300 doors within like 2 days. And I can say I barely ever got negative reactions to that. Did you, Robbie?
Not often, no. It was very occasional.
Very rare. Yeah. And most of the time, even if people didn't want to really hear me, they'd at least be polite. Nowadays, they'll run you out quick.
Yeah. And that's the difference. That's a perfect example. You see it in curriculums in schools. I mean, you guys see that all the time, I'm sure. You've got to be very particular about what curriculum you get, because you've got to be concerned with the way that it's trying to teach certain things.
Even Christian curriculum now, they don't really teach a Christian worldview. They call themselves Christian, and they try to stay negative or neutral. And in staying neutral, they actually bend the children more towards a naturalistic mindset.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let me ask you this. Do you guys think that most Christians recognize that we're in the negative world?
I think they do now. I would think so, like real Christians. Because I think for a long time they were kind of cultural Christians when it was more popular to do so. But I think by 2026, I think it's become pretty clear that there's certain Christian values and understandings that. Then again, there are people. As we record this, are you guys aware of the the Democrat that's running for Senate in Texas, that's trying to present himself as a Christian? He's saying that God's that
he's a verb. God's a verb.
I just saw that. I don't really know what that means, but God is a verb. But he talks about how God's supportive of abortion and transgender, and so there is still in some ways a way to present Christianity as a positive thing. It has to embrace everything that's not Christian, basically that our world. A Christianity that basically just says, hey, everything our culture is doing is good and fine. That is embraced, but not a like traditional, or I would say biblical version of Christianity, for sure. And I think most people trying to follow it are kind of aware of that, because could you not be?
And this goes back to the subject we're going to be talking about. The reason that has happened is because our seminaries and Bible colleges have been hijacked. And so now you have people with PhDs behind their name who are saying, well, I've studied this out, and homosexuality is okay in the Bible. And you have the liberals going, look, that's the expert. They're saying it's okay. This little country town preacher is an idiot, and they don't truly love people. And so there's been a hijacking of education. Bunch of neckbeards, yep.
Sorry. Yep. I still love that, because Robbie's sitting like closest to the camera with no beard.
Yeah, here's my defense. Should have been like, hey, those neckbeards, those guys are dumb, but that other guy, he's.
I still hold to my previous phrase. You got to have a high testosterone to grow one of these.
Yeah,
no offense. I'm teasing. Robbie,
I don't.
Yeah. Robbie gets a 5 o'clock shadow pretty much every day. It's just very patchy.
Around 5 o'clock.
Exactly.
All right. So, one of the things that I think that is often mistaken when people recognize that we are in a negative world, they want to go backwards, right? They want to go back to the time when it was a positive world.
Can I say something real quick that I think kind of might? Okay. Well, I'm gonna say anyway.
No, I was
okay. So, like, because you talked about us growing up would you guys say we were born into the very end of the positive world? Is that kind of?
I think positive world ends somewhere in like mid 90s. Honestly, that's where I associate it. I don't remember where Ren says.
So most of our formative experience would be in that neutral world, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, the positive world was for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we don't know exactly how long the negative world's going to last, but a lot of people just assume it's going to keep getting worse and worse, right? If that happens, then that means that we grew up in a very odd time. That very weird short period in between. I can remember nobody sat me down and said, most people aren't Christians. I don't remember my parents ever sitting me down and saying that, but I got it. But I also got this idea, like, somewhere in my mind, that even though most people were not Christians, they had a certain respect for Christians because they saw Christians as like ethical, moral, good citizens, and that is how I viewed as when I thought about how other people viewed me, like in my family and the people who went to my church. I did feel it gradually as I became like an adult. I started to gradually see they don't actually respect us. They actually quite angry at certain positions that we take because direction the culture is going really, really is focused on certain things that Christians say that are wrong. The culture is saying is right. And there was this like kind of like this building like disregard and antipathy towards Christianity. And so I don't know exactly when I saw that, but I felt it gradually shift. Did you guys feel that gradual shift too? Would you say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think so. I think it's really perceptive though, what you said there, because I think there was an association. It was a positive correlation or whatever you want to say, like with being a Christian. But I don't remember there being a like shift like overnight. It was just sort of a slide. And that's where, a lot of people talk really bad about like cultural Christianity. And of course there is some really some bad parts of just a cultural Christianity. But one of the positives about it is like it wasn't okay to just like kill people in the streets and to riot and burn down, whole cities. And, it wasn't acceptable. Even with Roe versus Wade passing, like it was still, even in the 90s, I mean, you think about Bill Clinton was talking about how you want it to be rare, and all these things. So like even in the 90s, that wasn't a positive good. Now people are like, let's shout it from the rooftop, let's go around, praising these things that are very clearly evil. And so there was some good with cultural Christianity. At least sin wasn't openly, they weren't doing story time with trans people in the kids library and stuff like that. That wasn't acceptable with cultural Christianity. And so I'm not suggesting that we bring back that. In fact, I think that is the natural response. I think most people want to go back. They have some sort of nostalgia for that time, and so they want to go back to that time. And part of the premise, and Austin, I'll let you jump in here, but part of the premise is we actually can't go back to that time. There's no going back. We have to build. And so what do you think, Austin?
I remember growing up in the church where I was youth pastor for years, one of the secular songs that was sang by a special singer was Grandpa, Tell Me About the Good Old Days. And everybody was clapping and applauding. And I think about that and I go, okay, were things better in the 50s? Culturally, yes, because Christianity was dominant. But at the same time, there was a fake Christianity. When I first started pastoring here at Grace Point 17 years ago, I knocked all the doors around this area that I could. And I very rarely knocked on a door where somebody didn't say they were a part of a church, even though they couldn't tell me the name of that church.
Oh,
because because we're on the buckle. Florida's it's changing now, but Florida used to kind of be a buckle of the Bible Belt, and it was considered a part of polite society to be in church. And so that was the culture. They even if they didn't go to church, they would say they went to church because that's what good citizens do. Even 17 years ago. Now that changed very quickly since I've been here. I mean, it changed within a few years of me pastoring here. That's when that shift really started changing in culture. And I think social media kind of catapulted that forward. You had algorithms that made these people in echo chambers feel like they were the majority, and all of a sudden Christianity became the enemy. But our response needs to be what the first century church was. The first century church built a borough and built a community that affected the world. We need to get back to doing what the first century church did, and that's moving towards Christian nationalism. That's what it is.
Because the church in the first century, when Christianity first started, when Paul and the others were preaching, they were in a negative world, right? Like, it wasn't
that's exactly right.
People thought Christians were great. In fact, most of if you're trying to prove that Christianity, like that Jesus was, say, real, for instance, historically, you have mentions of Christians and Christianity and Christ from Roman historians and leaders, but they're almost all entirely negative. They're certainly not positive. So we do have historically like a blueprint of how people lived in a world that was negative. At the same time, I think this is where Austin was about to go, is that you don't want to be a perpetual minority. There's no there's no virtue in that. We don't want to be that. It is how we find ourselves, and we thankfully don't find ourselves back to where we were
with Rome.
In Rome, at least not as if we speak of this. So life is definitely easier for us Christians here. But talking about just that negative attitude, like it's been done before, and it can be done again, and it did change.
Yeah. Well, and Paul, when Paul addresses young Timothy, he says, "Yea, all who live godly will suffer persecution." In that text there in Timothy, Paul just talked about how he was stoned and how he got up and how he went back into the cities, like that whole story. And what did Paul set up in Ephesus through young Timothy? A church. These churches were grabbing babies from trash piles that were being thrown away by the Romans, raising them as their own, building community, breaking bread around the table, speaking of the Lord. Yeah.
One of the reasons that they got those kids that had been just left out to die is that in Roman society, children did not have value until after they'd been born for a certain amount of time. So, they'd found ways to justify killing babies that were undesirable by an arbitrary line of when their life all of a sudden, when they became persons and when they were all of a sudden not disposable. I don't know why I brought that up.
It sounds very familiar today, though.
Yeah, because Christians put value on life because the imago Dei, because the image they bear. And so from the very beginning, we've always been the party of life. Life matters. Those babies matter. And so you look at the first century church, they were a minority that built communities of education, of support, that's why Paul tells us to prefer one another. He commands the church to prefer one another. The order of amoris, the order of love, that is a community, a borough, and they literally flipped the world upside down. And how many, 200 years, Robbie?
Are you talking until Constantine type?
Yes.
That'd be about 300 years.
300 years. And if it happened once back in a society that was pro-homosexual, pro-pedophilia, that's what the church was born into. People forget that. The church was born into a society that threw babies on trash heaps. Women had no value. That's what the church was born into. And within 300 years, we've seen a birth of Christendom and the first birth of Christendom. And then we see it slightly die off, and then we see it born again, and then we see it slightly die off. And I believe with all my heart, we're going to see it improve in each Christendom that comes up.
Yeah. And I think ultimately we don't rebuild the civilization that we think we want to go back to through being nostalgic about it. We actually rebuild it through labor. And so, we have to have a builder's mindset, and that requires something more than just thinking about maintenance, right? And so I think we've entered a time where we're in an age of rebuilding. We didn't inherit from our fathers what we want our kids to inherit from us, and so we've got to rebuild. And, we can try and preserve old institutions as much as possible. But we have to, at this point, start talking about how do we build new institutions. And so, I think naturally, when we talk about rebuilding, we think about the story of Nehemiah, right? Nehemiah also did not live in a positive world. The Jews in that time were had to be given permission to go back, right? And the walls were broken, the gates were burned. And so all the institutions that they had hope in were laying in ruins, and their job was to go back and rebuild. So thinking about that perspective, why do you guys think that most Christians, or maybe I shouldn't assume, do most Christians struggle with the idea of embracing rebuilding? Like why
I have a scripture verse for that. Solomon gives us a little bit of wisdom. Ecclesiastes 7:10. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For this is not of wisdom that you ask this. It's a foolish thing to say it was better back then. And our kids cannot inherit a culture that us as fathers fail to maintain and build.
That's right.
I actually think that whole nostalgia idea is just human nature.
Okay.
We always look at the past as better, whether it was or not. Because a lot of times when we think of the glories of the past, we filter out the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We only think of the good stuff, like the 1950s. There are some legitimately good things about the 1950s to think about. Man, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great to have the level of church attendance that we had back then? Wouldn't it be great to have the crime level that we had back then? But then there's also some other stuff that not so great. You can kind of filter that out and not think about that. And that's always been. I mean, not to get political here, but Donald Trump's "Make America Great Again" thing.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? That's an appeal to nostalgia. That is Donald Trump thinking back to his youth, saying, "Man, wouldn't that be great?" You know how many people have ran on that history? Things used to be great. Reagan said something very similar to that. Of course, he wasn't thinking to the 50s. He was thinking back his youth. Much even earlier than that. And so many different people have promoted that. Man, things used to be great. Let's get back to that. And they can never really rebuild it the way that it was.
I think that part of that is right. Conservatives by nature are seeking to conserve something,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're going back, how do I maintain this? How do I conserve, the life that I grew up in? Whereas, the liberal party is now more progressive, and they're always thinking forward. And you even see that in you talked about "Make America Great." It's talking about going backwards, whereas progressives are trying to move forward in a direction that is the opposite of that Christian positive world. And so ultimately what they're really saying, without actually saying it, is we want it to be even less of a positive thing to be a Christian.
Yeah. And when you think about conservative and liberal or progressive, conservative wants to conserve, right? They like the way things are. They might even think things have moved too far away. That's why they want to get back to the past. Liberals want to change things. They want to free us from what is now to something that they feel is better. In that sense, you could say that does depend on where you live and when, right? On what you want to do. So for instance, if we spend the next 100 years continuing to decline, continuing to repaganize, we're going to have to, the conservatives are basically going to be the people trying to keep things the same are going to be the people who hate God. It's going to be the liberals are, trying to change things. So the Christians in the first century, they weren't trying to conserve things. They were trying to change. Yep. They did create change by the proclamation of the gospel. More and more people started to repent of their sins and follow the ways of God through these Christian communities that were sprouting up everywhere and gradually growing. They weren't growing all at one time. It took, like we were saying, a couple hundred years. But, in 300 years, we went from maybe like 100 Christians, thinking about the amount of people that were in that upper room at Pentecost.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've seen estimates of about like 10% of the whole Roman Empire was Christian by then, which doesn't seem like a lot. But when you think of how big the Roman Empire was, and the fact that they had to deal with persecution, they had to deal with being the weirdos, they had to deal with false Christianity as well. If you think about that, within 300 years, that's an amazing change. And then all of a sudden, the change started to really speed up over the next 100 years, to where 100 years after that, pagans were the minority.
Well, and I think we also forget, because we tend to talk about the Western church because it's our heritage, but during that same time period, you had the Desert Fathers, you had the Eastern Orthodox, and you had the rise of the Ethiopians, and Egypt became a Christian nation, and Israel became a Christian nation. We forget that was all going on at that same time period.
That was actually part of the Roman Empire, though, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Rome, even what the reason that you had Carthage and all these places that were, or Hippo and all that is because of Rome. So even those Western Christian values spread to Egypt. And of course, then, we can talk about the Crusades another time, but what were you going to say, Robbie? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Nehemiah showed up to a world with broken walls, and they built the walls with the sword in one hand, shield in another. The world kept saying, hey, come over here to Ono, and they're saying, no, we're not coming. Nehemiah kept building and turned his little society upside down. And I think we need more Nehemiahs building in our generation. I interrupted Robbie, didn't I?
You're good.
Okay.
I think that's a great point. And I think what I fear is if we don't get the builder's mindset, right, then we fall into the abyss. And so when I say abyss, I want to be really clear, I'm talking about fragmented Christianity, isolation, fatherlessness. We already see that, dependency on, digital geek churches, consumer Christianity. And then, of course, really the main thing that I think about is disconnected households. So families that are isolated from church membership, churches that are isolated from other churches in the community. And so ultimately what that does is isolate us from our heritage, our Christian heritage.
Yeah. G.K. Chesterton says the disintegration of a rational society started from the drift of the hearth. So the whole ideal of destroying the family. And if you look at the movement that's become negative world that we're in, it's really anti family. Yeah.
Do you guys see that the governor of Indiana declared that June is a recognition of nuclear family month?
Tennessee did it, and then Indiana did it. Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's Tennessee's your home state, right?
Yep.
Indiana's my home state. What about your home state of Ohio? Have they done that? Awesome.
Yeah, no. But I was born in Indiana, so I claim them now. And then the dude up in New York signed a mayor statement that what's his name, Madani, that all children's bedtimes are hereby canceled so they can watch the game. Did you see that?
Yes, I did. And I have very strong feelings about this. I can look over Madani's Islam, I can overlook his socialism. I will not look over him being a Knicks fan and encouraging those precious children and trying to influence them to become Knicks fans. I hate the Knicks. I will be cheering against them. And he should be impeached.
He should be impeached because that's great. What do you think about the abyss, though, Robbie?
As I said, I'm from Indiana. I'm an Indiana Pacers fan. All Pacers fans hate the Knicks. So I'm just I'm taking a stand. The Knicks are bad.
Yeah,
you're brave.
Yeah. It's funny when he signed that. I know he was trying to be tongue in cheek, but I thought to myself, how dare he have a bunch of kids around his desk saying, hey, as mayor, I'm saying you don't have bedtimes, which goes to a deeper problem. The state thinks they own our children.
Do you really think he was saying that, though? He's just trying to be funny, right? He's trying
to be funny, but that joke would not have been funny 100 years ago. Because parents, no mayor would have put themselves to a level of saying something about an individual's home and how they run their home in such a way. I know he did it tongue in cheek, but it speaks to a bigger problem in our society. It really does. It's not, the image of God is what my children bear, not the image of Caesar. And Caesar has no right to make any dictation about how I raise my kids. So I know it was tongue in cheek.
That's gonna be one of those clips we share. I'm gonna share that clip right there, and you're gonna get in so much trouble. They're gonna call you a neckbeard.
I hope so. I look forward to it.
A neckbeard
who's actually raised kids.
Well, maybe there are. I don't know. Never been to New York City.
But I think a big problem, we walked away from the hearth, the family. The church just became a consumer thing. And so the people of the church started acting like consumers of Christianity instead of like the people of Christ. And when we act like a people, we're a nation. We're a nation whose maker is God, who has a king who's Christ. And because of that, we have a kingdom to build in his name.
You say we walked away from the family. Like what do we mean by that? Like, what way did people like walk away from the family?
It started in the colleges and universities attacking the nuclear family. The ideal that a nuclear family is oppressive, that a woman who actually focuses on raising kids is oppressed, and that she should go seek true fulfillment and going out and finding a career and putting off children. And a lot of these women put off children into their 30s and then can't have children. And what's happened is the family and the family devotion and rearing children is really what pours over into the rest of the nation. And when the dinner table is no longer Christ owned, it affects the way those kids act socially throughout all of life.
I think the family has been attacked from like multiple different directions. And so that even if one direction doesn't affect you, most likely you can be targeted by one of them. But the universities for sure want to break up the nuclear family. That's part of communism. That because you're trying to break down people's loyalties other than to the state. You got to break down religion. You got to break down the family. You got to get the kids in state-sanctioned schools, force them to be there, and train them the way the state wants them to behave, and to the point of informing on their parents if their parents aren't if they're putting them to bed before the NBA finals or whatever. But in more serious stuff, if like the parents are promoting something that the state is, saying is bad, you say, you try to get the kids to tell on their parents. Now that does affect some people. Some people do think that families are oppressive. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was basically two celebrities talking. They're two celebrities from a show that was on when I was a teenager. They were just talking about their lives, and they both said that, as a man and a woman, that they're in their 40s and 50s now, never been married. And their philosophy is if you're not going to have kids, there's no reason to get married. So they've just kind of bounced around from partner to partner. One of them even saying that they've had several very long term like partnerships that lasted like 9-10 years, but then something would go wrong, and it's just it kind of shows the way that from so many different angles the family has been. Even when you have a family, a lot of times the husband or wife, either one or maybe both, are so focused on career that even though they technically have a family, they're not being there for their spouse. They're not being there for their kids. And so you have all of these different things kind of distracting the family from being kind of this unit where you have a husband that lovingly does the family, a wife that's supportive, where they nurture and raise the children. They stay together even through difficult times. The kids have those role models, that teaching. A lot of times that doesn't exist, and there's various different reasons for it. Sometimes there's just no husband in the home. Because there's no husband in the home, the wife has to work constantly, and so she's not there to really shape the kids in any way. And so for multiple different reasons, the home very much, I do believe, is under attack.
Does it make sense to go ahead and define what a borough is? You want to say that, Robbie? Tell me to define it.
Yeah, go ahead and define it.
All right. So a Christian borough, the first thing that probably pops in your head is some sort of like commune, right? Or compound, or, some kind of gated community. But what I want to establish...
Is there Kool-Aid?
There might be.
No, not in ours, but there are cigars on our compound.
There are cigars on our compound. That's right. That's right. And maybe a little bit of bourbon. Who knows? No, the real point that I want to make here is that first and foremost, a borough is not primarily a location. Okay. So a borough is a covenant cluster of households, churches, schools, businesses, and institutions that are bound together by a shared confession of Christ. So I'm going to say that again, because this is the definition from the book. A borough is a covenantal cluster of households.
This book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So a borough is a covenantal cluster of households, churches, schools, businesses, and institutions that are bound together by a shared confession of Christ. And so a borough happens, it's what naturally forms when you have Christians who stop acting like isolated consumers, start acting like the people of God. So what do you guys think about that definitional definition of borough. Is it short-sighted? What are we missing?
We're waiting for Robbie's approval.
So wrong. No, just kidding. No, I think what you're saying, because I don't think people use the term borough. Although if you read the book, it explains why. I think it kind of explains like where the term borough
Where it
comes
came
from,
Uh-huh.
and why you use that term. I think what you're getting at is first of all having the Christian household, then connecting Christian households together. So it's not like you go to church once a week, you see people, and you say, "All right, see you next week," and there's no real other connection, and that you happen to go sit in the same building once a week, you sing some songs together, you hear some things, and there's somewhat of a connection there because you're hearing the same sermons, you're worshiping. There is something about like shared life that really brings people together. We have that kind of less and less in our society, not even just among Christians, but I think in general, there's like less and less that people like connect with that everybody's kind of doing. Like if you talk to people from our age bracket, because there were much less TV channels, and like when we were kids, pretty much everybody watched the same shows, the same movies. There's so many options today that's not really true anymore. There was a time, of course, when everybody in the community kind of went to church, and so you had your church community. A lot of times they did other stuff together. There were church picnics. There were all kinds of stuff. We don't have that as much anymore. Everything is much more much more isolated. And so, but what you're saying is we need to bring a Christian community, a Christian borough where we are connected in many ways.
Yep. So let me define those. Let me define those ways, and then we'll discuss it. So, borough has households that know each other intimately. To your point, Robbie, about not just seeing each other on Sunday, they know what's happening throughout the week. They're praying for each other. They're sharing life together. You've got churches that cooperate together, which is kind of interesting because we sort of have that here, Austin, where we have some churches who are very aligned, but we haven't really cooperated yet. We haven't gotten that borough established between the churches. I
will say we have had conferences together.
Sure.
Okay. And we also do a youth camp. Not saying that's enough, but that is at least a part of what you're talking about, right?
It's the beginning of it. It's the beginning of it.
And those churches tend to send their kids to be educated at a school that we started. There's another school that one of the brothers in our group is starting in Ocala, and there's another one out in the woods. And so a borough is
out
much
in the
more
woods. I like that.
Out in the woods. Yeah, it's out in Salt Springs area. It's the woods. So a borough is much more than just the churches cooperating, though. It is building a community to educate your children. It is preferring one another, as the scriptures teach us when we have businessmen who are AC guys, painters, carpenters. It is building a legacy together and caring about each other's legacy. You know, the thing is, a true borough, I'm going to care about the burdens of you two brothers as much as my own burdens. That's what a borough, and that's what a healthy church looks like. So a Christian borough is, in fact, a healthy Christian church that's not acting like consumers. But it's growing beyond the church.
But by consumers, you mean you don't just come to get stuff, like you actually get involved. Is what you mean by that?
You're serving. You're actually in the life of the church. You're not just sitting there for a sermon and then leaving before, And
you're thinking generationally. So borough thought would be, you know what? Our town needs a good Christian coffee shop. I'm going to go start one. And the borough community is, you know what? We love so-and-so who started the shop. And when I get coffee out, that's where I'm going. Because I want to leave my money to their children's legacy because it's going to be a Christian legacy. It is the builders. We have a lot of builders in our church, as far as construction guys. It's writing and thinking about our children not yet born, and building an opportunity for them to be educated in a Christian worldview. And I would love to see our borough grow to the point when we have hospitals and universities again, like we did back in the day.
When you think about like building things that will last like longer, like the Christian school that I went to, I started going to it in the late 90s, but it got started in the 70s, right? So there were probably people involved in that may not even live to see when it was benefiting me. And that's what we ought to be doing. We ought to care enough about future generations to kind of pass that pass that down. I've been reading through First and Second Timothy recently, like just on my own. There's so much there about how Paul passed it down to Timothy, and then he's supposed to pass it down to other people. And so part of what we're doing is passing that down, supporting one another. And I don't know, maybe you guys don't like the word community, but that's kind of how I think. Okay, you like the word community?
Yeah.
So yeah, and so you're saying it's not just religious as far as the church; it is economic.
Yep.
We support each other's businesses. Of course, we should be able to do that because Christians are working hard to the glory of God. They ought to be doing a very good job. Their businesses. You mentioned AC guys. We have an AC guy in our church. Man, in Florida, that's like the best business you could possibly have.
And the worst at the same time.
And I can say he does a really good job. I'm in my classroom right now, and at one time the AC really struggled in here, and that company came in and put a new unit in, and now I can freeze people out if I really if I really want to.
As far as business goes, a borough community holds men accountable to be godly businessmen.
Yep.
So like I remember growing up, if my dad seen a fish on the bottom of a business card, he didn't trust them. And they did us wrong more than other groups because they'd use Christ to sell their product. And there's nothing wrong with having Christ the center of your business. He should be the center of your business. But a Christian borough is a community of men who says, this is the moral standard, this is how we're running our business, so that when society sees all of the businesses and wherever you're at, here in Bellevue, Summerfield, and these people are known to be a member of Grace Point, they say, well, these men are honorable in their words and in their practices. And they bid and they charge what they say they're bid. They finish when they say they're going to be finished because they have Christian character in their work.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that we'll get into later is a borough has leadership that when somebody doesn't do what they say they're going to do, the borough leaders talk to that person and say, hey, man, listen, that's not the standard that we have here. You said it's going to cost this. This is what you said, or this is what you said you'd do, and you didn't do it. Like, if you're going to be part of this borough, then you got to keep these standards up.
I want to say this to try to push a little bit back towards our original topic. Your choices are borough or abyss. That's the choice. So are we going to build it? Or are we going to raise up our kids in a negative world that hates them?
Yeah, and it's going to get worse than this. Go ahead, Robbie.
In other words, there is no preserving what's now, right? Like it's just going to keep decaying and getting worse. That would be abyss, or we will build and establish something, but it's not going to just stay the same.
And that's what we have to do. We have to teach our children by example to build after us.
Yep. It's generational vision, which we've talked about, a lot, but you've got to have that generational vision. So let me do this though. Let me define borough one more time, and then I'm going to define what a borough has. And maybe we can get a clip out of this as well. So a Christian borough is a covenantal cluster of households, churches, schools, businesses, and institutions bound together by a shared confession of Christ. Borough has households that know each other, churches that cooperate, families that share burdens, businesses that are owned by believers, schools that reinforce truth, grandparents near grandchildren. A borough has shared traditions and shared responsibilities and shared worship. And then I think that worship part is really important. A borough has people that worship together, and they're, like you said, Robbie, earlier, they're hearing the same message each week. They're on the same mission. They're aligned.
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't think
what happens though. Go ahead, Austin.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say though, before we end, I kind of want to talk about what happens if we don't build.
Everyone becomes Knicks fans.
Oh, that'd be the worst world, wouldn't it?
It would be terrible. Yeah, we can't afford not to build.
You can't afford not to do a borough, or else you become Knicks fans.
Knicks fan.
And Mondami is your father.
My plea would be the listener start thinking, not just what do my children have, but what are my grandchildren going to have? What are my great-grandchildren going to have? Am I leaving an inheritance to them? I think at some point with this dispensational, we're going to be raptured out of here, so why build anything? It led to a culture where we stopped thinking. They would say, oh, no, we didn't. We keep proclaiming the gospel, and they do. They're faithful. I would say they are faithful to sharing the gospel, but they're not building the actual schools and institutions to support and teach those things to the next generation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think every culture disciples its peoples, right? And the institutions catechize. And so the systems that we have in place form the people that inevitably come out of that place. And so neutrality, and we've talked about this, neutrality is a myth. It is not an option. And so ultimately what we're saying in this episode, and what we'll be saying for the next 11 episodes, is that Christians must become builders again. And so if we don't build, ultimately we will be built upon.
I would say, especially because you mentioned a whole bunch of stuff that boroughs are connected in, like different topics. I would say especially education. You've got to build systems of education, institutions. The reasons we are where we are, at least I realize there's spiritual stuff going on behind the scenes. I believe that, and I can't see those things, so I can't comment on those things. But we have not had a takeover by liberals, progressives, atheists, whatever you want to call it, by a violent revolution.
Yeah.
We have had them gradually take over educational institutions. When they took over the educational institutions, they were then able to influence the other institutions because, after all, people in the media are being educated, right, before they go into the media. Hollywood has always had kind of a liberal bent compared to whatever generation that they're in. It's like wild. It's like wildly like far there. Well, a lot of where they're getting that stuff, is education, media, all of that stuff. And so if you're going to resist to those things, or ideally attain those institutions and get those institutions back, we've got to be willing to do the same thing, and patiently build towards creating our own institutions, influencing the institutions that are there, so that we can either they crumble and then we have our own institutions already in place, or we have the ability to send our own people in those institutions. Because one of the things that Austin said was like, that the dispensational attitude that we're going to get raptured. Well, they don't always like do as much because they think, well, society is going to end anytime. They do build Christian schools, but their main goal is to, and I don't want to be misunderstood here, but they want to teach them the Bible and teach them to win souls, which is good. A lot of times they don't focus on the other stuff. Having a good understanding of the things of this world, so that we can go in and build and do things in this world, and be wise, educated people, because we're talking to an educated society, right? So we need to have those things, but from a Christian worldview to combat what they say. Otherwise, if kids know nothing about science, they're going to hear these atheists speaking from a supposedly scientific perspective and saying, science shows that there's no God. It shows that the Bible's not true. Same thing with history. With English, they're going to be given literary sources that point them away from the things of Christ. Like, we have to be able to raise people to combat these things and to build our own institutions and teach those things. And then we have to be able to, either by replacing or by of taking back over those institutions the way that they took them, by this gradual
the long march.
Yeah. I mean, it can take a generation or two to really make those changes. We saw that it took 300 years for the original Christians. We are not as much of a minority as those original Christians, but how long did it take to go from the Christian positive world to the negative world?
Not long at all.
Yep. Well, it depends on what you mean by quick. Like, compared to 300 years, yes, quick. But it didn't happen right away. Like the people of, like, say, the 1960s had to go get jobs, infiltrate our universities, get elected, and of course, initially they're getting elected to lower positions, so they had to gradually, kind of work their way up, and so that takes a little bit of patience. Think about the distance between Roe v. Wade, and the was it Dobbs? Is that what it is?
Dobbs.
That ended Roe v. Wade. That is that took 50 years. Right?
Yep.
It could have easily taken longer if the Supreme Court judges had turned out different. So it's part of it is playing a long game. Like, we have to be faithful and understand that we may not see the full fruit in our generation. I hope we do.
Yeah.
But
no, I mean,
but if we don't, we're still being faithful and building towards that future, whether we see it or not.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal point. I mean, one of the things that we're going to stress over and over in this is that we are planting seeds, for trees that we will probably never sit under. We'll never get the shade from the tree that we're trying to plant today. And we've got to be okay with that because, like you said, Austin, it's for your grandkids. That's who we're building for, generational, and we've touched on that recently at church too. And I know that we will continue to do so. So any closing thoughts that you guys have? We're right at about an hour. And this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg where we're going to go. We just wanted to establish what the options are. Either you build or you will be built upon. So Borough or Abyss. And then we'll, the next 11 episodes, we'll talk about households. We'll talk about churches, schools, to Robbie's point, economics, leadership structures, culture. And we'll talk about the actual mechanics of a Christian borough. So we've got a lot on the plate for this fourth season. But any closing thoughts that you guys have before we sign off?
You rant about the Knicks again if you want me. Want me to, but you.
We'll save that. We'll sprinkle that in each episode.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, the borough is the seed, and the goal is to harvest Christendom. Okay. And so every harvest must begin with planters. And so I want us to think of ourselves as we go through this season as builders, right? We are planting and we are building for a time that we probably will never see. And we've got to be okay with that.
It's really just understanding what God has called us to do.
That's right.
I like to read a lot of biographies. Yeah, right now, when I'm not reading Strongholds of the Kingdom, I just started a biography about George Washington. And, one of the things that hits me as I read those biographies, most people will not have biographies written about them.
That's right.
They will not be remembered. But God still calls us to be faithful. Like our lives, our callings do matter. God does have a plan. So we need to build, and whether we are remembered, not, whether, there's lots of institutions and things that we benefit from that were built by people whom we don't even know their name, but we are grateful for them. There's also some very harmful people that we don't know their name have done some things to really hurt our society as well.
Yeah.
So yes, our call here is to be faithful. Maybe we see the fruits of our labor right away. Maybe it's in the far future, but we need to be faithful now and do what God has called us to do, and just trust Him about His timing.
Man, I don't think you can one-up that, Austin, so we'll just end it there. Until next time, folks. Have a good